In this video, we are going to look at a practical example of how validation rules work and how they can be very useful. So I'm under my Students tab and I'm going to try to create a student record by clicking New. I'll just give it a name, say Sam White. I'll just pick out a birth date, random, gender, male, and everything else for now I'm just going to leave as is because everything else is optional anyway. So I'll hit save. And there we go. Our student record has been created. So we can see Sam White has been created. However, there is something very wrong with this record. That is that the birth date here is in the future. It's basically 3rd January 2025. So that's not even possible, right? So we cannot have a student who isn't even born yet, right? So if we created data for Sam White, meaning he's an interested student or maybe he's already a student, so someone made a mistake in entering the birth date. Now the birth date certainly can never in any case be in the future, right? So these are the kinds of things where we want Salesforce to throw an error, or maybe we want Salesforce to put a check and ensure that the user who is entering the date receives some kind of error when they're entering the date in the future. Now we can actually customize it even more and force users to make sure that the date they're entering is at least 18 years old or 16-year-old. But for a simple example for now, let's make sure that a user is unable to enter a date which is in the future. Now in order to actually do something like that, we need to create validation rules. Now how do you do that? Very simple. Just go into setup, click on object manager. Now here you have to search for the object on which you wish to create your validation rule. In our case, we want to create it on the student object. Click on student, and down below you're going to see validation rules at the very bottom on your left. Just click on that, and as you can see, currently there are no validation rules, so you can simply go ahead and click new. So you can provide a name for your rule. For example, I will simply say birth date check. You can call it anything you want, so the name doesn't really matter. It's basically for your reference. Make sure you check this active box. It needs to be checked. Description, you can add a description if you wish to. This is optional. For now, we're going to look at this, the actual formula box where we're supposed to enter our formula. So basically, here we have to enter a formula that will result in true. If that formula results true, Salesforce will throw an error. So if we simply wish to simplify this, so in our case, we need to use the birth date field. So you can click on insert field and it'll show you all fields on the student object. You can pick out the one that you need to. So I'll pick out birth date and I will say insert. So our field has been inserted. So now the next thing I will do is I can say birth date greater than, today is, let's say, we'll just make it 1st December. So if birth date is greater than this date, Salesforce should throw an error. So if this formula is true, meaning the date that is entered in the birth date field is greater than 1st December 2024, we want Salesforce to throw an error. Now there's actually something wrong with this. And the thing that is wrong with this is maybe 1 year from now when you're entering the birth date, and if you try to enter a date from December 2024, Salesforce will still throw an error. Why? Because you hard-coded this date. Now even 5 years later, Salesforce will still run this formula, and in this formula you have given the date of December 2024. Now that is wrong, because we need the date to be dynamic, right? We want to actually check in real time if the birth date is in the future or if it's in the past. So 5 years from now in 2029, if someone enters a date in 2025, the date will actually be in the past, but according to Salesforce, it'll be greater than 2024 December. So Salesforce will still throw an error. So this is obviously not the right solution. Now, in order to solve this, we have to use functions that Salesforce gives to us by default. So a lot of these functions are very useful. Some of these are pretty advanced and we may not need to use for a validation rule. But in our case, a very important function is called today. So if I scroll down, I can see today. If I click on it, it tells us that this function will return the current date. Now that's exactly what we need. Now if you wish to learn more about all the other functions, you can always go into this link, help on this function. This link will take you to a Salesforce help article where it'll have the details of each and every function that exists in Salesforce. For now, we will simply say insert selected function, and we've inserted it. The birth date greater than today. If it's true, Salesforce will throw an error. So for now, today's date is 9th December. Maybe next week, today's date would be 15th or 16th December. So the today date will update every day in real time. So whenever someone creates a student record and they enter a birth date, Salesforce will compare it with the actual date of that day. So this is all we have to do. Our formula is ready. Birth date is greater than today. Greater than today. If it's greater than today, it should throw an error, meaning it's in the future. Now if you scroll down, you have to type in an error message. So I can simply say birth date should not be in the future. And you can choose to throw that error either on the top of the page or on a specific field. So we want to make the error visible on a specific field. And then you can choose which field the error should be shown on. I'll choose birth date over there. And I will try to hit save. There we go. Our validation rule has been created. Now, if we go back, and if I go back to the students tab, if I refresh, and I will try to create a new student. John Welsh. For birth date, I will enter something in the future. So I'm entering 10th January 2025, and I will try to hit save. And Salesforce gave me an error saying that, hey, we've hit a snag, please review this field birth date. And when we review the birth date field, we can see it says birth date should not be in the future. Great, so it's working. Now if we move the date to the past, so something in November, for example, 30th November, and now if I try to hit save, Salesforce should allow me to save it. And there we go, it worked. And now even if I try to edit the record, so I've saved this, so John Welsh's record has been saved. Now if I try to edit it and change the birth date to the future again, just trying to trick the system, and if I try to save, Salesforce will still throw an error saying that, hey, your birth date should not be in the future. So our validation rule is working perfectly. Now obviously we have a lot more flexibility with validations. You can customize it more. You can also customize it to make sure that the birth date is at least 18 years old or 16 years old, and a lot more. So for now, let's try to do it 18 years old. So we go back to the object manager, and this is our validation rule. So let's just go back to student. So this is our student object, validation rules. This is our validation rule that we created. I can simply click here and I can say edit. And now we can simply edit this if you'd like. So how would we tell Salesforce that if the birth date is greater than today's date minus 18 years, then please throw an error. So first we want to do today's date minus the 18 years. So we subtract that, so we'll get the date, which is 18 years ago. And then we want to compare our birth date with that field. Now it is super simple. In Salesforce, you cannot subtract years directly from a date. So you have to subtract it by days. So now we need to know how many days are there in 18 years. So there are about 6,570 days in 18 years. So we are simply going to subtract. So we're going to say minus 6,570. to today minus 6570. And we're actually going to put the whole thing in parentheses. So this is more like a mathematical sort of, best practice. So today minus 6570. So it'll subtract 6,570 days from today's date. So that would then equal to, I believe, 2006. So December 2006. So now we're comparing. So this whole thing, once you subtract today's date with 6570, that'll equal to December 2006. Now it'll compare birth date greater than December 2006. If so, please throw an error. So now your birth date, if it's greater than December 2006, you'll get an error. If it's before December 2006, Salesforce will let you create it. So now let's also change our error message accordingly. Birth date, or we can simply say age, should be greater than 18 years. And let's save it. And that's it. Now if we go back and we refresh, and let's just edit the same record that we have here. So now if we do this, and I'll change this birth date to something in 2002. So that's way over our validation, so that should be doable. So this means this person is 22 years old. So I've done 18 September 2022. I'm trying to save it, and it worked. That's great. Now I'll try to save it with 2000 and 2012. So 2012 would mean that this person is about 12 years old, right? So if I choose a date at random, and let's see if that works. Nope, you hit a snag. Age should be greater than 18 years. Perfect. So our formula is working, our validation rule is working. So that's one practical example of how you can control users' entry and how you can prevent users from entering the wrong date and make sure the data in your system is consistent and meaningful. Thank you.